Hey darlings. Vadim married Anastasia 3 years ago. It's important to say that he would never marry her if this girl didn't become the sole owner of his own business after his father's death. The insult instantly brought back a young and strong man who seemed to be the only man around. Nastia was his favorite, the only child in the family. After her mother died, the girl became the light in the window for businessman Dmitry Lvovich. After the death of the first wife, Nastia's mother, he preferred to meet young girls. Therefore, naturally, Nastia remained the only heir to the entire state. There was no doubt that Anastasia did not need money at all. Cute, but not too young, used to living on behalf of women, and paid attention to her. If Nastia listened to the beautiful promise of a professional jigsaw and believed them with no regrets, then Vadim was intended to live with a lady as usual until there was a more profitable option. It turned out that the most profitable option for Jackpot in his entire life was Nastia. The colossal legacy of Dmitry Lvovich's death. She was completely in love with the girl, and Vadik knew how to use money. The girl fell in love with him, and he thought he could manipulate her and manage all the money and assets according to his own discretion. After the death of Nastia's father, Vadim's plans for the girl suddenly turned degrees. That he didn't have time to part with Nastia and throw away something that would cut his way back. But everything worked out as well as possible. The girl was really killed in grief. Her father was her support and the main person in life. It was this state that became another gift for Vadim, who could turn any situation into his own advantage without it. He instantly surrounded the girl with care and attention, changed, as it seemed, the miserable orphan to the best side. At a terrible moment showed his true face. The young and naive girl really did not understand that the worst moment in her life, on the contrary, provoked him to hide his true face as deep as possible. In any case, he did not show it before the wedding, and behaved exceptionally well until the paths were cut back. The proposal of the hand and heart followed from his side almost instantly after the funeral. Naturally, with the promise that he should endure the mourning for his father. Vadim was able to lie, turn around and pretend to become who he needed to be and do what he wanted. Usually, with his rich girlfriends, he did not try and. Even here he was lazy and did not want to make extra efforts, living under the motto, and so it will go down. Here, the game was worth it, the efforts were not in vain, and the cunning man understood this clearly. The first trouble for the potential Alphonse occurred from the side that he had not foreseen and could not foresee. Dmitry Lvovich was the best friend. He was his chief deputy in the company, and the father of the god Nastia. He immediately realized that he would not be able to talk the girl out of marriage. The young and naive lady fell in love like a cat, plus the pain of losing her father required compensation. But as a smart and bright person, he categorically insisted on the conclusion of the marriage contract of young people when they entered marriage. Vladislav Fedorovich, knowing his baptism much longer than the newly advised groom, he managed to lure her to his side without any difficulty. Vadik, if this requires business, is it really difficult for you? The girl gently insisted that she, in turn, was inspired by Vladimir Fedorovich. This humiliates me. You think I need money from you? The man was enraged. Such a development of the situation did not fit his plans at all. Honey, this is simple and formal. He is needed only in the event of a divorce. The godmother really wants us to sign the marriage contract, and he was always like a second father to me, and now, it was only Vadim who pointed out that he was the only one who could manipulate this couple. The girl was not a mistake at all. Yes, perhaps the fact that she never had to need bread played a role and made her somewhat naive in financial matters, but otherwise she was not a fool. If she set a goal for herself, that she was achieving it no matter what. With such a question and such an argument, Vadim had no choice but to choose. He was simply pressed to the wall. He had to agree to all the conditions of Vladislav Fedorovich. The wording in the marriage contract was standard, but completely cutting Vadim's rights. It was clear even before that business and all other property inherited from his father could not become the joint property of the spouses. Accordingly, during the divorce, this part would remain for Nastia and would not be an object of dispute. But Vadim naively assumed that he would get into the dividends, would acquire new property, assets, and so on. And for this, he certainly wanted to have a legal relationship and then divide during the divorce. The contract, made by a high-class lawyer, but the man thought that he would benefit from this marriage anyway. He would be able to climb the pockets of his wife without any control and eventually make capital for the future. He would gradually take money from the common budget and transfer it to his name. After all, the marriage contract kept the balance of rights and interests. Bank accounts opened in the name of the spouse were also not considered jointly owned property. And here Vadim got a finger in the sky. Vladislav Fedorovich was rarely a loyal, decent, and responsible person. He controlled Anastasia's financial flows not only in business, but also her personal finances. Vadim had very modest amounts of money for his own personal expenses. Sometimes the amounts were even less than those he got used to in premarital times. But here Vadim decided not to be discouraged either, and see how the situation will unfold in the future, and whose benefit the score will be at the end of the game. It turned out that patience is really a benefactor that is rewarded. Anastasia, from the first day of marriage, desperately tried to get pregnant. She wanted to become a mother. But every new cycle brought grief and disappointment. At first, she wrote everything down on nerves and stress, forced by the mad pace of life. It was necessary to take on business in their own hands, to learn a lot on the go. This naturally exhausted her. More than a year of unsuccessful attempts forced the girl to still turn to specialists to undergo a full medical examination and find the cause of failure. It turned out that everything that Nastia wrote down for the crazy lifestyle were symptoms and anxiety calls. Her body rang the bell. He said he had problems, but she ignored him. As a result, doctors reported a discomfitant diagnosis. She had an oncological condition. For almost 2 years, treatment and suffering, here in her homeland, abroad, either did not bring results or minimal success with subsequent relapse to the previous state, and sometimes it got worse. Anastasia was treated for almost 2 years, and Vadim, and just nominally performed the function of a loving husband. His skin-thin interest was in the fact that Nastia just didn't become one. Apparently, he couldn't hide it well enough. Neither she nor he ever told openly, but Nastia knew about the endless girls that her husband cheated on her with. There were no secrets and discoveries in this for her. Vadim already seemed to be still very good at conspiracies and manipulations. That he was doing great with the role of a husband of a dying wife. That no one knew about his intrigues. It seemed to him that his lucky star found him again. That there was little left to endure, a drop, and the golden key would be in his pocket, in the literal sense of the word, gold. But in fact, Vadim's behavior was condemned and discussed by everyone, from the nurse's sister in the hospital where Anastasia was lying, to Vladislav Fedorovich. He tried to open her eyes, showing her pictures of Vadim with women. What are you waiting for? Divorce. Don't you see what he's doing? The man just was not happy in his helpless rage. He did not understand this desperate desire of a woman to save the marriage on the edge of the grave. This topic was terrible for him. He did not want to hurt the girl, his beloved nun, anymore. It was very painful for everyone. But when he realized that Nastia knew everything about her husband's behavior, so he stopped holding back. He was confused, listening to the calm and even voice of the girl in response. He was also afraid to say out loud one important legal nuance. Nastia has no will. Her only heir, first of all, is her husband. This scoundrel inherits everything that was inherited by the unenlightened work of Dmitry Lvovich and somewhat multiplied by Nastia herself. What is there to hide from Vladislav Fedorovic's efforts? It was also a pity. So much work is in vain. He realized that this little man would be able to wipe out the whole state in a few years. Well, as the young and recently beautiful and blooming girl says about it, Vladislav Fedorovic literally did not find a place for himself from this injustice. But he could not go against his conscience and openly speak to the priestess. There will be no situation just in case. By this point, it was no longer a secret that there are simply no chances. Nastia is dying, and this will happen in the near future. The bill was on for a week. Vadim had already wiped his greedy hands. His eyes were burning with anticipation of getting rid of the gloomy and sick wife and acquiring solid capital. He thought it was a matter of the hat. Vladislav Fedorovic. He prayed that he wouldn't have to start a conversation about the will himself. Fortunately, he didn't need to. Nastia started this conversation herself. What a shock from the story of the priestess was the man. He did not expect such thoughtful steps, such enthusiasm, and such a cold calculation. Indeed, revenge is the dish that is better served cold. Nastia perfectly mastered this thesis and embodied it into life. What Anastasia had invented and realized required a lot of effort and time from her, but she, having completed her journey on this earth, realized all her dreams and hopes. This conversation between the priestess and her second father was kept secret from all the unconfirmed. Naturally, the traitor and deceiver Vadim did not enter this circle. He learned everything in the very last, when it was impossible to change anything. Unfortunately, the miracle didn't happen, although he was the last to be trusted by close people like Anastasia. Everyone except her husband, although it was unlikely that he could be called a close person, and Nastia died. The funeral and the civil panic had already been discussed, and the most calm and cold-blooded person was carefully planned. She built plans and dictated her last orders, expressed her will. The woman was calm and firm. The next day, after the farewell ceremony, Notarius called the people mentioned by Anastasia Dmitrievna in the will and asked to come to his announcement. It turned out that Anastasia wrote the will and made it closed. No one knew his text, even Notarius. And for everyone, his content will be a surprise. It was open to Notarius himself, only a note with a statement, a list of those persons who should be present at the announcement, and on what day after death it is necessary to announce the will of the deceased. Vadim was shocked by such a call. He was sure that his wife had never compiled any official document in case of her death, and that her husband would become her only heir, as is usually the case in such cases. He went to the meeting with his new lover, the beauty Marina. He thought it was a very spectacular bravado. It was a slap in the face of the deceased wife, regardless of the will. He couldn't afford to leave the place, being slapped and humiliated, his tale being that the fact that the lover is present and the husband's immoral behavior will not change anything. It seemed to him that he was cunning and wise, calculated all the options, and ensured himself. It turned out that the late wife was wiser. Vadim came to a meeting with Marina, who was appointed to a certain place. It was a closed office, where several people had already gathered. Seeing Vladislav Fedorovic, he was not surprised. But what was his shock when he saw his family friend, that is, mostly Nastia, her childhood friend Alexandra? The horror was that he came not alone. He came with a stroller in which there was a child, quite a baby, judging by the clothes of the boy. He did not hear about any marriage with Sasha, and about the birth of a child too. Vadim, of course, did not pull the name of the candidate of any science. But you can't call him a fool either. His heart immediately stopped beating, and he realized that the situation smelled of kerosene. It was all for nothing, and he was outwitted. Nevertheless, it was necessary to preserve his face, since he had already come. And curiosity was rebelling. I really wanted to know what Nastia had come up with, although it was already clear that something extremely humiliating for him. The situation escalated, and suddenly it opened up. That there was a will, and his hidden announcement was that there was a little child in the room. For minutes, all the people who gathered silently sat in different corners of the room, and no one else came up. In the dry remains of the initiative of Anastasia, at the announcement of her will, Vladislav Fedorovich, her godfather, the friend of Nastia's childhood, Alexander Dobroliubsky, who arrived at such an event in a strange company with a baby in a wheelchair. The boy was curiously looking around everyone and, it seems, everyone was happy, and the only one who was satisfied with the company. Also, Vadim and Marina were sitting in the room. Of course, Nastia did not call Marina. Like Notarius, she was strictly present at Vadik's initiative. He suspected that his girlfriend would be forced to leave to comply with the full confidentiality of the procedure. But old man Notarius, who appeared minute by minute, with agreed time, did not say a word about the fact that there are strangers in the office who should be removed. As Anastasia's husband later figured out, it was done on purpose, to humiliate him even more. Notarius, it seems, deliberately, pulled the introductory part as much as possible, telling why they gathered and about what honor. He declares the last will of the deceased. Already at this moment, by the evil grin that did not leave the face of Vladislav Fedorovich and by the desire to look at Sasha, Vadik realized that the content of the will is a secret only for him. For a long time, the old man read the introductory part and the preamble of the document. When did he finally get to the most important thing? Then again he started with the obvious and boring. Was in the hope of the audience and their response, so there was nothing surprising and unexpected in this, and still Vadim was already very nervous, and this was already noticeable for everyone around him. To begin with, Notarius described for a long time the last will of the deceased regarding her godfather, Vladislav Fedorovich Nikitin. Everything said in the will concerned his activities in the company, and that any right-hander must appoint him as the leader until he decides to leave her to his own will. It's understandable and fair in general. But this part, it seems, was written by Nastia on 3 sheets, and the old man read it boringly, and as a result, very slowly. The impatience of Vadim multiplied by the speed of the turtle that the notary had developed. Finally, the culmination of the text, Vadim heard his name. The old woman read to my legal wife, Vadim Nikolaevich Safronov, I refuse to inherit. Having read this modest and brief description, the reader looked carefully at Vadim, looking, asking, as if he had caught the essence of what was said. The humiliated husband had nothing left but to nod. He was already mentally prepared and determined to show his reaction publicly. Marina took him by the hand and tried to get up to demonstrate, but Vadik kept her in place. She looked at him with a questioning gaze that the man ignored. He would also want to leave his current residence as soon as possible, where his wife publicly humiliated him. But the show was not over yet, and the invited viewer. I wanted to see him until the end. After the pause, Notarius continued, all his property at the moment of my death, no matter where it was, I entrusted to my only son, Robert Alexander Dobroliubsky. Until his last breath, I appoint the guardians and rulers of the property, his father Alexander Dobroliubsky and Vladislav Fyodorovich Nikitin. All necessary documents are in the applications for the will. It was a blow below the belt. It seems that Vadim and the truth hit very immorally. He felt pain physically. What? Son? From Sasha? His patience burst and broke out together with a surprised scream. In addition to Vadik and Marina, this news did not surprise anyone at all, which is natural. If one was a father and the other signed documents with the agreement for care for the minor. Vadim suspected that his wife would throw something out, but where did she get this child from? With all confidence, he could say that she was not pregnant. He was not more than a year old. No matter how impudent he was to his husband, he would have noticed the child's belly. Is this child Nastia's? Vadim asked loudly, not in a daze. By that time, notarios had already gone far from the announcement of the heir and began to clarify procedural moments. A loud scream interrupted the old man, and all those present, without opening their eyes, looked at Nastia's husband. Yes, Robert, Anastasia, and Alexandra, Vladislav Fedorovich was the first to find. She was not pregnant in the last 2 years. It is impossible. Vadim desperately clung to Solomon. Although he himself understood that with the current technologies, it was absolutely not necessary. The possibility of medicine is now simply striking in the imagination, amazed. It was clear that the shock and disappointment of Vadim were very warm to his soul. We did not deal with Nastia with love. Sasha's reply was completely unnecessary and violated all the mischief that Kresny had just spoken to. But that's why Nastia chose Sasha as her father, because he was incredibly well-bred, decent, kind, and just. He couldn't help but point out all the things that would make Nastia think that she was right, that her husband and her oath didn't violate her until the end. I don't care, Vadim yelled in rage. He didn't shout the rest of the phrase out loud, as it was intended, only because he was looking at the baby, who was still curious, looked around at people and watched them with interest. This desperate burst of emotions of Vadim was due to the fact that his words actually hurt Sasha. Despite the terrible features of his character, Nastia's husband was different. He still burned this comparison. It was extremely unpleasant to realize how much he was a scoundrel and how much he would have offended his wife if she had taken revenge on him. Vatika's cry made everyone present think. The man himself was discussing his life and behavior. His companion was desperately collecting pieces of reality in which she would not be the wife of a rich widow. Notarius, who was used to such a dramatic life collision, Vladislav Fedorovich and Sasha were immersed in their memories of the day that brought them to this room. The young man remembered how horrified he was 2 years ago when he learned that his best friend was ill and that doctors practically gave her no chance of recovery. It was a shock for him how calmly a young woman was discussing how much she had left and what she should have time for. Then she told her best friend that she wanted to become a mother, no matter what. Can you do it? Sasha was naively surprised. Of course not. But I agreed that before starting treatment, I had to take the egg cells. I was immediately warned that with a high probability, I would not have to raise my own child myself. But I insisted, Sasha. I grew up without a mother myself. It's not easy, I know. But her love has always warmed me up. I felt that she was close and loved and cared for me. Vadim, what? I agree to raise a child. The friend carefully answered. Who will allow him? He would be glad to become a nanny and spend money on the child. He has enough conscience. No, I already understood that my dear husband is, frankly speaking, a person with dubious human qualities. This is if we speak correctly. And his reaction to my diagnosis and prediction of the disease, oh, I don't even want to discuss it. This person shouldn't be upset. And what about the child then? I wanted to talk to you about this. Nastia was cringing, which was extremely inappropriate for her. Usually she was not shy. I don't know how to talk about this tactically and delicately. Probably there are no such ways. In general, I would like you to be the father of my child. The woman spoke out with a fast talk. Are you kidding me? Sasha was clearly not ready for such a turn. Do you have a husband? The man just sighed in shock and fell into a clang. Alexander was not at all ready for such an offer and did not understand what his best friend, his Nastia, was leading to. Yes, I have a husband, and he will remain with him until my death. I have already decided that. Sasha didn't understand what she was leaning towards and just kept silent until a specific offer came. Sasha, of course we won't sleep, and that's pointless in my current state. Unfortunately, I can't bear the baby anymore. I asked to take the eggs from the cage. Now I need biological material of my future father. Craig's, Peck's, effects. The doctors will conjure up, and there will be a child. Of course, a woman needs to bear it and give birth, but fortunately, such services are now also presented. You can go a little more in-depth about pecs. He tried to make a joke on the man to somehow disperse the situation. I'm serious with you, I say. Nastia was outraged right away. At first it seemed absurd. A woman who was desperate for nonsense. But in her head there was a whole plan, quite logical, which she shared with pleasure. That she had already conducted a huge number of black preparation work by the time of the conversation. She learned everything about legal aspects, agreed on the services of a reproductive clinic, and even pre-selected a surrogate mother for the future baby. Sasha, understand, I would use the services of the donor, but I need a father for the baby. For me, it is no secret that I will hardly wait until the baby is born. But I really want to leave at least something behind, my little piece. But it is worth thinking who this baby will stay with. I thought for a long time, but except for you, I have no one to rely on. Only in you, I am sure. Knowing you for so many years, I know and believe that you will be a wonderful father. I understand that the fate of a father is lonely and jealous, but I don't know how to formulate not to press on you. Everything I want to say will press you to the wall, and I don't want that. You probably want to create a family, get married, and have children naturally. It's logical. But please think, don't answer me right now. For me, after I got burned on Vadim, it is very important that my father's child doesn't care about money, that he gets everything from me like I do from my father, so that he doesn't get robbed and appropriated by ungrateful people. You understand everything yourself. Now I'm not as stupid as I was before marriage. Vadim taught me a lot. Now I have a colossal life experience. Thanks to Vladislav Fedorovich, who made me insist on the marriage contract, otherwise it would be difficult to imagine what would happen now. But thanks to the Lord, all the money I have and Vadim has no access to them and will not have. Sorry, but that was another argument for me to choose you. You don't need money at all. You have so many of them. My father, for the first time, put a man's reply, correcting the argumentation of Anastasia. You know that they will get you. You work for days to make family company prosper, but you never needed it. Now I know for sure that the hungry can't understand it. A person who grew up in poverty will never stop thinking about a piece of bread. And if he is also stressed with upbringing and orderliness, there will be trouble, which is what I got into, the woman added sadly. To be honest, I'm completely confused. I imagine the process of becoming a father completely differently, Nastia. Indeed, I never wanted to apply the status of a single father to myself. Guessing that everything said today should remain secret? Absolutely true. I have to ask you for permission to consult with your parents. I didn't give her the opportunity to speak up. Nastia, you know my parents since childhood. Information will not go anywhere from them. Understand me. I cannot make such a decision alone. I cannot and do not want to take such responsibility. This is a child, a baby. I will not have enough only nannies if you do not become. Need help from close people. You have no parents, immediately cancel them. But I have them. I have to make them known and ask them for their opinion. Nastia surrendered. There was nothing to say in essence. She only begged and swore that the information would not go further. Sasha could promise this. The conversation with the parents was very difficult. Dad neutralized everything said, all explanations, and said that he would support any decision of his son. And naturally, as much as possible, he will help with his grandson or granddaughter. Was not so liberal. She, like all mothers, wanted an ordinary and happy family for her son, so that he could marry a good girl, and together they would have children together. She was endlessly sorry for Nastenka. She knew her from childhood, from the best side. But this is a request. It was very difficult for the mother to accept that the mother of her potential grandson dies, and the child himself will bear a foreign woman. And the child, she can't tell if she has a disease. The woman was afraid of this question. He was terrible and awkward, not in his place, but how could she otherwise? This is her grandson. She must know for sure that nothing threatens him. After overcoming the oppressive nature, she asked what Sasha's father was shy of asking. She almost immediately said that she had an illegitimate form of disease, and the biological material was carefully examined. This calmed the anxious mother a little, but not completely. Everything didn't work out the way she wanted it to, and in general, not typical. And such an uncertainty was very scary. Nevertheless, thinking about it, she supported her son and said that she would accept absolutely any decision of Sasha. And of course, she will be a nanny with a child and help everyone she can. It will be her grandson. It can't be otherwise. Sasha himself also hesitated for a long time. And who would have been able to make such a decision? Nastia's proposal fell like snow on her head. After long internal struggles, he decided that there was no point in refusing. What about what? Can you feel sorry for your child's birth? When he announced his agreement with Nastia, she was just happy. The next week, they already started the step-by-step implementation of her plan. While Sasha was sitting and recalling the whole story that dramatically changed his life, Vladislav Fedorovich recalled a conversation that Nastia started just over 2 months ago. The priest came to visit her in the hospital, as always, and at first nothing unusual had happened. Unexpectedly, the priest took the bull by the horns and said that she needed to talk to him seriously. There is an important conversation. Starting from afar, she said that she considered Vladislav Fedorovich her second father and hoped that he would not refuse her. The man silently listened carefully to what she was leading. Nastia, apparently, was preparing for a long time for conversation, thinking about how to lead him. But at the last moment, she forgot everything in her emotions, and having made a melodramatic pause, Anastasia said that she wanted him to form documents so that Vladislav Fedorovich would become her son's guardian. At first the man thought that the nun was delirious. What the hell is a son? Having read something similar, reflecting inner distrust and doubts in her adequacy, the girl started to explain in a sultry way. Having heard the story completely, the godmother was simply in shock. Not only did Nastia and Sasha decide on such a desperate step, but they also hid it for so long. How much is the baby now to Robert? For days ago, it was 8 months. The nun smiled. I can meet him. Of course. What are you asking about? Nastia called Sasha and asked to bring her son. In 2 hours, they were 4, sitting in the room and silent. All eyes were fixed on the baby. You guys know how to surprise. The man was in shock. While Sasha and Robert were going to the hospital, Vladislav Fedorovich. Here she revealed her cards, all her plans for the future, that she would not divorce Vadim only for the sake of teaching him. It would be easier to divorce. It turns out, by law, the presumption of fatherhood is in effect. If I am in a marriage with Vadim, then he should have been automatically registered in the father of my son. In the registry, we were told that there were no options, and that only then will I have to dispute fatherhood through court. I found some cool lawyer who built everyone there in even rows. The situation is not typical. We had all the medical documents that immediately confirmed the fatherhood, and therefore we went to meet. The trip to court would certainly smear all the plans. I don't want Vadim to find out about the child before my death. In general, my will be open, and he will find out everything at his announcement. Everything has already been decided. How it will be composed. What will be there. They submitted all the documents and I signed everything. But there is one unworked moment left. Robert has only one parent. From day to day, this will happen and only Sasha will remain. Now I have rethought a lot in life, and I don't want to hope for nothing. Sasha has parents, and if anything happens to him, Robert will be with them. But I want you to have rights in case of something, including I have to think about business and about in what condition will he get Robert. For the lonely Vladislav Fedorovich in life, only work before Nastya existed. He was very worried about her illness. There were no doubts. He agreed to everything that a young woman asked for. For him, she was dearer and closer to everyone, and after the death of his friend, her father did not. The only thing he was very worried about was the provocation from Vadim. He was good at dealing with people, but he felt that he couldn't be treated like that he would be a real jerk. Although he deserved such a relationship, you can't argue with him. Nastya, I'm sure that you should do this to your little man. He's a nasty person. You should get along with him. Why do you need such revenge from the grave? He said he thought, and immediately fell asleep. You understand what I'm talking about. I'm sorry if... Stop it. I've been thinking about it for 2 years. I saw how Robik was born. I saw how Sasha loves him. His parents, how they loved the baby. I don't need anything else. I've calmed down. Don't worry, say as it is. Now I am much more irritated by those who tell me about some mystical recovery and healing. As for Vadik, I loved him so much. I believed him so much, and he is just the most ungrateful bastard. They come to the hospital to me as if on a strike. His daughters bring him here, you know? The man with a bitter smile nodded. Everyone around was whispering about it. Vadim had long stopped making secrets from his adulterers. And I should forgive and let go of it? No, he loves money the most. I will punish him with them. Let him build air castles for himself. He will not know about the will and about Robert until the last. It will be a surprise for him. You see, I hid everything from you. It was very difficult. I wanted to introduce you to my son right away, but I was very worried that no one would accidentally find out and tell Vadik. Let there be such a farewell. I wrote him a letter. Notarius will convey. Vladislav Fedorovich sat and thought about talking to Nastya. It took place almost 2 months ago, and since then he has tried to convince her several times. It seemed that this was a very bad idea, but she stood on her own and had to step back. After all, this is her last will. You have to be respectful. During the sudden silence that arose in Notarius' office, everyone was thinking about their own, and Vadim was thinking, or rather, he was scolding Nastya, swearing at her. What the light is on. People like him can't be sure that the blame can be on them themselves. That the behavior of other people can be an absolutely normal response, but it's too difficult. Why look for problems in yourself? Vadim was just standing there, hanging on the table, in a long pause. How strange. Marina's silence interrupted. She tried to take the lover by the elbow to get him out, but he was not going to leave. He did not finish, did not say everything. He was only interested in money, and he did not see the point of hiding it. He turned to Notarius and asked, I am not allowed anything. I am a must, or whatever it is called. I am a husband. The man's rights were wiggled out. Even Marina was upset by such behavior, not to mention the rest. Only the old man Notarius, for whom such behavior was familiar and expected, was not at all surprised. In accordance with article of the Civil Code of the Russian Federation, in which the circle of persons with whom a mandatory share in inheritance is named, you are not included in it. Moreover, I carefully studied your marriage contract. Its text is attached here. The old man clapped his plump palm on a thick folder in front of him. You have no chance of even turning into court, although the right to such a treatment is naturally preserved for you. If you disagree, you can try to dispute the will. Of course I will dispute. It is still not clear from whom, in fact, this slander, which she wrote to her sons. Vadim went to the... Even the usual calm and cold-blooded Vladislav Fedorovich suddenly turned red from the tide of madness. Kakadov was calm notary. For him, everything was within the framework of a regular working day. He was not surprised by anything, he calmly answered to this. Not only the testimony about the birth of a child, but also medical documents that give exquisite answers to questions about his appearance in the world. Moreover, In the inheritance case, the deceased request contains the results of the DNA test, the research that confirms that the biological mother of Dobroliubov's Robert Alexandrovich is your wife. I can immediately warn you that the entire package of documents is collected in full on all cases. I can see. Vadim wanted to see it with his own eyes. No, you can only get acquainted with the part that concerns you personally. All other documents, especially those that concern the underage, can only be disclosed with the consent of his parents. I do not allow, of course. Sasha instantly gave a voice. Then Vadim Nikolaevich only in case of judicial review, if the court will consider the necessary and demand these documents. This is what Vadim has finally achieved. He flew out of the office, loudly knocking on the door, screaming on the run that he would not leave it like that. His companion turned out to be more patient and educated. She said goodbye and left, quietly closing the door behind her. Nothing that this idiot did not sign and that he was announced the text of the will, asked Notarius Vladislav Fedorovich. Such as he, through one. Nothing. Formality. Calm his old man. We can go? Robert wanted to go to the circus, to see the animals. Now I think that's enough for him. It would be funny if it wasn't so sad. How could Nastia contact him? The godmother was in confusion from what she saw. The question was rhetorical. The men quickly signed the documents where it was necessary. They shook hands and parted. Vladislav Fedorovich. I helped Sasha to get little Robert and get down with the stroller. Will you come with us? I want to take a walk, to breathe some air. And the baby needs it. Of course I'll take a walk. For some time they walked next to me and kept silent, listening to the rustle of the stroller wheels that were carrying the peaceful sleeping baby. You think Nastia would be happy with how I do? Finally, Alexander asked his worrying question. I'm sure of it. You're just a great dad. You can't take your eyes off him. You're one and the same. Nastianin, the godfather, encouraged him. To be honest, I can't think of anything else. You know, I think Nastasia shared with you that I was talking her out of what had just happened. You're talking about that church with the will and how he found out about Robert. Vladislav Fyodorovich kept silent and only nodded. Of course she said, replied Sasha. I've been talking about it all the time. I didn't like this idea at all from the very beginning. He's a nasty, angry, stupid, and mercantile type. Why would I provoke him? Honestly, I even had the urge to tell him when the baby was born, but Nastia hid it so. I thought I didn't have the right to do that. I somehow convinced myself that she just doesn't want to connect with him and leaves these problems to us. And today I saw him with this whore. I was not shy. And now I'm not sure what I did right when I did not insist on my own. His reaction, facial expression, how the whores walked, horror. It was necessary to get rid of him earlier. Moreover, I read the marriage contract. It was possible to kick him out in a second. And now I owe the right of the heir's representative. Go and directly take away all his valuables, the car, move out of the apartment. I don't want to see him. I think Nastia didn't want to either. It also played its role. And revenge. She wanted to take revenge because she loved him, so that she wouldn't say it later. She loved him very much, and this bad love didn't find another way out. My poor girl. The man wiped away the tear that fell from the traitor's cheek. Don't be sad about her. She asked not to do this. She just asked for all the love that we had for her, to Senderobic. Sasha stroked the godfather of his best friend on the back. While the men were talking about their own and giving each other memories, Vadim and Marina watched them from the car and also discussed the same topic. And what? You won't get anything at all? You're such a fool. I told you. That's it. There's no chance of getting out of this mess. Okay, let's go. We need to take something valuable and transfer it to my apartment. 3 days later, when Alexander gathered his moral strength to go to Nastia's house, there was no one there. He was preparing for a tough confrontation and even took 2 people with him from the security service to protect himself from unnecessary problems. But Vadim understood everything correctly and moved to his own. Of course, not without his own benefits. A lot of things were taken out of the house, objects that were valuable, but which could be attributed to the individual, that is, more or less, the legitimacy of Nastia's husband tried to keep. Vadim himself sat in his tiny kitchen, in an apartment that had been taken from his parents, and drank bitter. His Marina left him, which was quite expected. Why would she need a beggar man? Vadik sat and thought about how he got to this point. He was paid before, and now a young and beautiful girl takes money to be with him. Of course, not a young and depressed. Because of his sins, Zigula blamed himself for all the troubles. Naturally, in his version, the culprit of what happened was his wife, who drank all his life and eventually broke off with the inheritance. He hoped for money so much. What will become a moment with a successful businessman with a bunch of assets? With such a loss, it was very difficult to make up for. As Nastia said correctly to Alexander, Vadim builds air castles in his head. He really built them. In his dreams, he was young, beautiful, successful, and very rich. And because of her, he lost everything. It turned out that he was not as young and beautiful as before. This perfectly demonstrated Marina with her Fyric leave. At the farewell, she told him a lot of pleasant things, that he did not need anyone, that he was a poor drunkard who was. The ex-lover just finally told the truth, because it became absolutely pointless to pretend. Because of the ex-wife, it was added that he now could not be successful and rich either. The chance to become a successful businessman collapsed like a card house. For almost 2 weeks of his life, Vadim spent the first drink. He wanted to get away from reality. It was very difficult to make up with this pain. As a typical infantile egoist, he did not consider his guilt in the event at all. The root of all troubles, and the embodiment of the devilish atrociousness, was his dead wife. After all, when he married her, he was the dream of any wealthy lady, and he became like a homeless person, all because of her. He constantly screwed himself up and convinced himself that all the blame was only on Nastia. Naturally, the power of hatred was gaining momentum with each passing day. In one of the morning rites, Vadim finally decided that he was enough, that he would not succeed in this way, and would not even take revenge on his ex-wife. As it seemed to him, she would only rejoice and have fun, seeing him being carried away into the abyss of alcohol addiction. The man still decided to take himself into his own hands, not to drink for several days, to go to a legal consultation in a more or less decent state. Suddenly, he noticed that not everything was lost before him, that perhaps there was at least some chance to get at least a small taluk of inheritance. Earlier, he hoped for the whole kush, but now he would be glad even for a small supply. He felt humiliated to the core when a few days ago people came from Vladislav Fedorovich. Vadim was actually raped. The keys were taken from the car, and the trust that Nastia gave was torn apart. One of the Zambalovs said, "Did you not know that trust loses its legal power after the death of the person who gave it?" Vadim felt stung and morally destroyed. He was hanged on the back of the head so that he could speak faster where Nastia's jewelry was hidden. He didn't think for a second that he had done something wrong. In fact, after stealing his wife's jewelry from the house, he thought it was his right, that he had the right to do something. He had been suffering for almost 3 years for no reason. He was given some compensation. In his own eyes, Vadim drew his portrait of almost a saint who did not leave the bed of his sick wife. He forgot about his passion for gambling, alcohol, and his annoying attitude to his wife in those moments. It's a very convenient quality for such irresponsible egoists who only love themselves and draw their portrait in their heads without any flaws. Vadik had been convincing himself for so long in his indecency and perfectness that he believed in it himself and was ready to prove it with his own mouth. With all these thoughts, and in the drunk injustice and his own honesty and indifference, he was on a period of detoxification. As it turned out, he was already attracted to alcohol, which surprised Vatic. He wanted to drink desperately, but he only held on to the fact that he convinced himself once again of how good he was and how unjustly he was thrown, how he should get up and go fight for himself, defend his rights and legal interests. It was with such a message that he needed to help and feel sorry for. He went to a legal consultation. The cute young girl was very sympathetic to him, and it seemed that she was completely on his side. When the matter came to the point that it was necessary to give the client advice, she firmly said that there were no options. You see, you yourself signed this marriage contract. It is made up rarely, professionally, and carefully. You simply cannot claim anything that you have acquired in the marriage of property. This is if we are talking about the removal of some part of the inheritance mass, which would have been given to you in the context of the marriage regime of the joint property of the spouses. But there is nothing to be removed from here. There was no such regime. It is excluded from this marriage agreement. And what about inheritance? Notarius told me at the announcement of the will that I do not enter the circle of heirs, which is considered as a mandatory share. Which is considered a mandatory share in inheritance. Yes, the law clearly states the list of such persons. It is closed. You really do not enter it. Could my wife really write a will, excluding me from it? Yes, of course. And you could do the same. The will is designed to change the general order that is provided in the law. Here is exactly the same as with the marriage contract. You, having signed it, have changed the regime of joint property of the spouses prescribed by the law. The will changes the order of inheritance, which is prescribed by the law. If there was no will, then you would inherit for your spouse in parallel with her son. This order, changed her last will. I can argue this. You can always try, but there are no chances. I'm telling you this openly and honestly. There is no basis for recognizing the will. The return agreement with Nadezhda in her voice decided to clarify Vadim. The same thing. There are no standard statements of business people trying to save their capital. If you want to know my professional opinion, I would not spend my nerves and money on useless courts. Clear? The last hopes fell on deaf ears. Excuse me, I didn't understand one thing. You said that if there were no wills written, we would inherit with her son on the same level, in equal distances, right? Yes. If there is no will, then the inheritance is done according to the law. In this case, the heirs are called to the inheritance in turns. First, the first turn. If there are no heirs, then the second and so on. In this particular case, your spouse did not have parents, you are a spouse, and there is a child alone. So you too would have divided the entire inheritance. The girl patiently explained the nuances. Because in each sequence of inheritance, a clear list of people is named. For the first row, these are parents, children, and the spouse of the heir. And what happens then? If the heir dies on the will, it depends on when he dies before or after the will is opened, that is, the death of the heir. This is substantial, as much as possible. If the heir dies on the will before the will is opened, and there is no indication of the heir, then the will is reset and the heir is followed by the law. If he dies after the will is opened, there is a concept of inheritance transmission. Its essence is brief in that the deceased after the death of the heir's heir is already inherited by the heirs of this second deceased. I think I'm confused. Can you explain it with your fingers? With your fingers, roughly and applicable to your case. If the son of your late wife dies right now, then all the property of your wife is inherited by his legal father, as his only heir first. How so? Vadim shouted. He came in a state of blind rage. This is how the law is provided. The legal consultant stepped away from the table, hearing such a reaction to a dry statement of facts. This is % true. If you don't trust me, then I can call my colleague or show you the position of civil law. No, there is no need for this. Anger has changed the bitter feeling of despair. After paying the bill, he went out, loudly knocking on the door. Is it really impossible for this damn lawyer to speak everything in a simple language, to explain everything normally? Vatic was angry at himself, and again he did not find the strength to accept the situation, to make up with her. No, he was looking for the guilty ones. This time the girl was the one who was guilty, who simply told him about his chances. But of course, in Vadim's head, the main monster that ruined his whole life was Nastia. She is to blame for everything. Why did I give up this damn child? He was angry, and if he really needed it, he would have given birth to it for me. Or what else? She would have taken my material. A nasty woman. It seemed that he was unable to access the information about why she behaved in such a way. And why did she want her child's father to be another person, but not her husband? And his behavior now, as bright and colorful as possible, illustrated why Nastia was right. The evil Vadim crushed everything inside of him. She was expressing herself outside and returned to him, burning everything on her way. He went to the bus and thought about why, because of his wife, he was forced to go down so much, that she and only she is to blame for everything. He was thirsty for revenge. It's a pity that she's dead and I can't stab her, he thought. So many times I barely held back my rush, reassuring myself that my patience would be generously paid. He began to think about how he would like to avenge her and what he could do now. A sick man who brought himself to the extreme and did not understand this. His thoughts jumped to the point that he wanted to go and argue over her grave. He thought about what was expensive to her and what would cause her the greatest suffering. The answer was on the surface, and he saw it. Small-minded Robert, Vatica was in a hurry. He walked and smiled because he finally came up with his plan of revenge. Of course, it was left to solve a lot of questions and structure, but the main thing was that he decided. No, he wasn't going to hurt him. Worse. Much worse. What's the main nightmare for a mother? Not being able to help her child in trouble. That's what he decided to do. The plan was simple and brilliant for his inflamed imagination. To kidnap the baby, take him to the neighboring city, and throw him into the orphanage in a week, so that they could not accurately connect the facts. Of course, the boy is no longer newborn, but still too young. He is not even a year old. So he won't be able to remember anything, and he's quite helpless, which was necessary. Thoughts about revenge and fantasy about her warmed his soul, if, of course, she was with him. He hasn't smiled like that for a long time. However, from the outside, such a grimace looked rather frightening, but Nastia's husband didn't care at all. You could even say that he was happy. Thinking through all the little details, he was suffering from euphoria. His hatred for him was not near, and he could not harm Nastia. But his wife knew her well enough to imagine how she would suffer from the misfortune of her child and the inability to help him. His wife's awareness and understanding of suffering brought him tremendous satisfaction. When the man's head was theoretically settled, he began to think about the practical side of the matter. It was necessary to find out everything about Robert's movements and those with whom he leaves the house to ideally pick up the place and time to commit the kidnapping. Vadim knew Alexander quite well in his past life, and even knew his parents. He was in their house. Now it was not even necessary to find out where exactly the father and son lived, in a city apartment or in a family's backyard. Vadim went to Sasha's office to track him down and thus find the baby. It didn't take long to wait. Now the man has gained a new status of father and tried to stay in the office for a short time. In the end, he took the job with him. He got into the car and went home. Vadim followed him, keeping the distance. When the car of Robert's father drove outside the city center, it became clear that they were going to the outskirts of the city. This complicates the plan. Vatic was somewhat upset. In the elite outskirts of the village, the reinforced security was both on the territory of the entire settlement and in the personal house of Dobroliubsky. Vadim knew this for sure. When he was convinced that Sasha had definitely turned to the side of the village of his parents, and there was simply nowhere to go further, Vadim himself drove past. He did not turn around, did not want to attract unnecessary attention to himself. Only at this moment did Vadim finally understand what difficulties he will have to face to implement his plan. It is not known how much time will have to be spent in the forest with binoculars in the literal sense to study the order of the day and the movement of the small. It was worth weighing everything again. Is the game worth a candle? Absolutely. Vadim, who was talking to himself, whose psyche was noticeably floating after the announcement of the will. This bitch broke my life, and I'm gonna break her life, you idiot. The rich heir, the man who laughed his ass off, will live on the whole state, and his mother will watch from above and understand that it's her fault. If only a man who noticed the changes happening to him and took him to the doctor. All people, in the end, get what they were striving for. As Valens said in the work of the Master Margarita, be afraid of your desires. They have the property to be fulfilled. Vadim so desperately wanted his wife's death and believed that this would bring him satisfaction, believed that it would make him lonely and rich. Not always desires are fulfilled as we expected. Everything that happened could serve as an important life lesson for him, but Vadim did not like lessons, and they did not benefit him. He has always been responsible for his mistakes, not trying to understand the situation and trying to find a reason for himself. But what Vadim was not equal in is in achieving goals. If he had put something in his head, then no matter how stupid it was, even in the process, he would have finished the case. Unfortunately, this case was not a happy exception. For 2 days he did not follow the police, but prepared all the necessary conditions for her conduct. Vadik walked all around the territory to find the perfect elevation. He needed a place where the entire village would be perfectly viewed, and most importantly, the house of Dobroliubsky. It was also important that no one saw the observer himself. His bedside should be quite hidden. The man did not spare efforts and time until he found such a place that he found ideal in all relations. More than a week, Vadim got up neither light nor dawn and rushed to the cottage village, and was there until late evening. He constantly watched with binoculars all that was happening in the house, who and when he came, when he left. He was carefully writing a note so as not to miss anything. It turned out that the child was occupied by the father, grandmother, and nanny. This is the main bone of the people with whom he left the house. Alexander and his mother were absolutely inappropriate people for the implementation of the plan. They both knew the face of Anastasia's husband perfectly and could immediately point to him. Of course, he assumed that he would be questioned, but he hoped to get away. After all, this child is the heir to 2 large companies. Did anyone cancel the kidnapping for ransom? In connection with this, the nanny was chosen as the victim of the attack. She came and left at a certain time and walked with Robert in the same places, in the same route, which could not but please. The stars came together especially for Vadim. On Wednesday, after a day's walk with a baby, who slept peacefully in a stroller, the woman went outside the territory of the village. On a small forest path, she went to a small clearing, where, obviously, the same nanny was waiting for her from another, the same nearby village. They chatted. Vadim even heard their laughter and walked with stroller. In order for the plan to work, it must be reliable. There is no need to waste time. It was in excess. This Vadim understood perfectly. Therefore, he decided to observe the activities several more times in a row, to understand this system, or rather an exception. The situation is delicate and requires great accuracy and confidence. Vadim temporarily stopped guarding the village every day. This will only attract someone's attention. He had to remain unnoticed. Now he only came on Wednesdays when his nanny went out for a day walk. And here everything was clear, as if by the clock. She went out on every Wednesday, and walked the forest path outside the reach of the security of the cottage village. It was just an unheard of, incredible luck for the kidnapper. He came 4 Wednesdays in a row to make sure that the system did not fail. When the fourth time he saw the nanny going outside the village, he left knowing that he would return to the next Wednesday at the same time, but he would already leave with the child. Vadim carefully calculated the entire path of the nanny, where it would be more convenient to attack her. For the attack, he bought a powerful electric shocker, bought it at the local bazaar, and paid in cash so that it would be impossible to track down. He thought over everything step by step to make it happen in a way that was not planned. In the same way, he bought an old domestic car, a trust car, of course. He stole the registration number and put the car in the car. He calculated where he would need to leave the car so that it would be close enough to run, but not so close that it would be seen by someone. The man thought of his own appearance, to hide his figure and face, so that it would be impossible to recognize him. Thoughts about kidnapping became just a habit. He fell asleep with them and woke up, thinking about the same thing again. Moreover, he even began to dream of how he kidnaps Robert, and in the smallest details. By the appointed day, he lost almost kilograms, became a shadow of himself. Even a quick look at Vadim already immediately fixed that this person should be threatened. And other obsessive states. On Wednesday, he parked in a place he had chosen in advance and began to wait. The minutes turned out to be hours, and Vadim arrived 2 hours earlier when the woman went for a walk with the child. This time seemed eternal to him. Such a long wait drove the mind of a person who was already in an unstable emotional state. Half an hour before normal time, he moved to the street, the observation post, and there he was chosen in advance as the place of attack. When Vadim saw that the nanny was walking down the path and pushing the stroller in front of him, his heart went to his heels. Such a long planning completely led him away from understanding that this would really have to be done. Completely seriously, you will have to approach an unfamiliar woman, push her, and hit her with an electric shocker. Then, take the child out of the stroller and run to the car with him. It turned out that in the head it was imagined that it would be completely different, like in a computer game. And here everything is real. Here she is, this woman. Here is the stroller. There is a baby in it, who looks around the world with curiosity. According to his nature, Vadim was not inclined to violence, and it was quite difficult to step over. However, he remembered why he planned all this. Remembered that raging hatred for Nastia, and ran out of the shelter. The first part of the plan was implemented on a 5-point basis, like the organization that was above all other praises. But then His Majesty came into the way. Vadim ran up to the boy's nanny and without difficulty pushed her off the cart, then fell to the ground and hit the electric shocker under the ribs, pressing the button. A powerful electric charge passed through the woman's body, and she, bent down, turned off. It was necessary to get the baby out of the stroller and run to the car with him. At this stage, everything went to a deadlock. Vadim was forced to sit on a mat in front of the stroller to untie the safety belts that the baby was fastened with. Suddenly, the kidnapper heard a loud sound and burning pain in the right side. He fell to the ground in the position of an embryo. Robert, scared of the sounds and sharply changing the pictures in front of his eyes. The next second, his consciousness had already left Vadim. He had come to his senses a little, only when some old man was standing above him in a village Jaeger costume and was breathing over him with in 2 neighboring elite villages. His old lady was almost in the middle, just a little further from the glade where the nannies from neighboring villages met. The housekeeper of the hedge was well hidden behind thick vegetation, and Vadim just didn't see him. As it turned out, on that day Uncle Misha was shopping from a local shop, where he had just bought himself a hot drink for a hangover. He always carried a gun in his double barrel. It's a long-term habit. As he later explained to the policeman, if the gun is behind your back, it's as if you're shoeing for business and you're not cooling down. It's convenient. That's how, returning from the shop, The eaglet saw suspicious activity as he expressed himself. Look, there is some kind of carol, all in black, and in the morning plus, I thought. I'll see what he thought of Shelma. The long-standing habit and skill of the hunter, of course, allowed Uncle Misha to move around the forest absolutely silently, so as not to scare the wild. Moreover, he knew this area better than his 5 fingers. Well, so I lined up for those trees. I showed the little man with my finger, giving an explanation. I stand and watch. I enjoy the lawn. At the same time I show alertness. Listen. He knocked himself over and turned to the policeman who wrote the protocol. I was like, a lie, and I won't get anything for that. I didn't even kill him. No, the doctors said he would live, and they will only give you a medal and money for encouragement from relatives. He was so happy that the crime was prevented, and he didn't lie to the department, that he forgave the man even the familiarity, which borders with the insult. He saw that he spoke without evil intent, and the woman was like, oh, how she pulled herself from his shocker. I even fainted. She's fine now, don't worry. Don't worry about what happened next. You rest on the lawn, you show your alertness. And then I see this bastard suddenly flinching at the woman. I knocked her down. I hit her. I thought he wanted to get mad at her. And he tries to get the child. Well, I smacked him. The mark is out. Yes, the distance is small there. I knew for sure that I would get into the boxing ring, otherwise I would not be able to fight. There, in the centimeters, the boy was sitting in the wheelchair in front of him. Right, you're good, Uncle Mish. You will now be a local celebrity. There are already journalists there. They want to shoot you. Come on, sign the protocols and go ahead. Warm up under the rays of glory. No, I will not go. You cannot go. Why? I do not want to. I will go to myself. Can I? Of course. If anything, you know that we will definitely call you. Come immediately by phone. Agreed? Okay. Uncle Mish calmly walked to himself with a roundabout way, so that no one would follow. It seemed to him that he did nothing special. In his place, everyone would do this. How not to help when they offend those who cannot protect themselves? Such is the upbringing, which apparently you will not break either. Someone politely knocked on the door of Uncle Misha's house. Come in, the owner yelled, getting up from the... What a happiness that you passed there at that time. Thank you for not passing by. Alexander was ready to cry out of overflowing feelings. The day was too rich and strongly shook a young man. Tell me, how could I thank you? What are you doing? There is nothing to say thanks for. What are the accounts when the child is on the eve? Uncle Misha was really, sincerely shocked that he was thanked for this. Nevertheless, Sasha continued to insist. Well, if you're so principled, you can buy me a Magaric and a cigarette. It's never too much. Of course, no questions. Listen, and if it's not a secret, this little liar didn't split up with me. They wanted to kidnap me for money. Yes. How to buy? Yes. Ask. Oh, unfortunately, everything is much more complicated there. Well, tell me if it's not difficult. I live boringly here in an information vacuum, as they say. It's for a long time nothing. It's okay, son. I'll put up a kettle, sit down, come on. Sasha started telling everything that happened to them over the year. About Nastia, her illness, the crazy idea of how they became parents, how she died and how she eventually avenged her husband. After that, he began to tell everything that he learned from the police. As it turned out, Vadim was honest in his plans. Apparently, he realized that it was pointless to defend himself, and it was better to tell everything to himself. As one captain said, he was strongly insulted for thinking that he was trying to make money. He was accused of revenge. Sasha was actually very happy that Uncle Misha asked, and even insisted on the story. He himself wanted to talk to someone about it, to share. Of course, the parents learned about what happened before him and knew the whole story. He himself called and told everything to Vladislav Fedorovich. But all this was not the case. They were biased, and never would have said what they really think. They would always defend the side of Nastia and Sasha. But Alexander himself wanted an unbiased opinion. He thought that they did it in vain with Vadim, that they provoked him to this confusion of mind, to this obscenity, pushed him to the desire to take revenge. And if it were only about him, Sasha would not have reflected so much. But everything done by his parents, returned to their baby? This was the main difference between Vadim and Sasha. One never blamed himself for what happened, so that it would not happen. The other, on the contrary, was in a hurry to think about his behavior. Isn't he the culprit himself? In the end, he could not stand it, and after he finished the story, he asked Uncle Misha, as a third-party observer, as an uninterested person, "Do you think we brought him to this? We're to blame for his desperate revenge." "Chew, you're serious, man. You're a grown-up, but you're so stupid. If this Vatic had found a reason, he wouldn't have needed you. You judge for yourself. He married for the sake of the green paper. He cheated like a last passerby, behaved like a scoundrel with a sick wife, and convinced himself that she's to blame for everything. What's she to blame for?" For once she answered, didn't endure, didn't swallow. Hit the sickest one on the wallet. On the contrary, well done. The woman came up with such a plan and pretended to be alive. This sly truth from the Sochi, the eyes of a simple peasant, really cheered Alexander up. He thought deeply about every word said by Uncle Misha. "Now I owe you also for a good advice," the man smiled. In return, the eagler only waved at him. They were already friends. Uncle Misha promised to look at the fire and not forget about the boy. "I heard somewhere that the Chinese seem to have such faith or wisdom. God knows how to call it right. In general, if you saved someone's life, then you are forever in response to this person. So don't worry about your Robic. I'll look here too." The Jaeger smiled and held his word. He regularly visited the house and was always a welcome guest. Despite his love for abuse, he never came to the table, and he always refused to come to the table, immediately went to play and talk to Robert. In his face, the boy found another family member he loved. 9 months later, the court sentenced Vadim and sentenced him to 7 years in prison. During this long period of time, everyone in the house calmed down more or less and began to live their usual quiet life again. The family was finally able to breathe a little. Vladislav Fedorovich regularly visited the boy and nosedived with him, diligently fulfilling the duties laid down on him by the nun. Alexander met a lonely mother whose daughter goes to one kindergarten group with Robert. Their relations have developed very well, and the children are getting along well with each other. The whole family hopes that this time everything will go well with his personal life, and Robic will have a loving mother and sister, maybe even more than one. But of course, Sasha, as promised by Nastia, will never let Robert forget his own mother. He constantly tells about her, shows the boy her photos and videos with her participation, constantly reminding that mom loves her son very much and she is always with him, and keeps it, even if he doesn't see it.